Okay, what am I doing here? Well, you may have seen that there are some, hoses on your table. Please do take them in your hands and just, beat them on the table or on your hands. Do it as loud as you can. Thanks. So, great. You are all great. I'm very nervous, I might add, because it is indeed an honor for me to open this conference. I came to know Parent Project only a few months ago when we started doing some work together about, communication through music. I am a musician, as I have said, and well, I'm actually a community musician, as we are better known abroad. I mean, I, get people to play. Actually, Parent Project is indeed a community. You know, in South Africa, they have a principle known as Ubuntu. I am because we are. So, the point is that the whole group manages the life of all the other single people, single members of the group. And this is what Parent Project has been doing for the last 30 years. So we might want to, clap our hand, or better, use our instrument here. And, communities have music at their very center. So this is my task today here with you. I'm going to be particularly challenging, which should not be a surprise for you. Of course, you are, used to taking up challenges every day. So we have some 20 minutes. We're going to make up a sort of an orchestra. Can we make it? Can we make it? Again, can we make it even more than that? Good. That's great. So, as it goes for all orchestras, there are different sections, each one with their own instruments. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to play our own role. We are going to have different sections, all of them giving their personal contribution, which is what happens in your daily life, by the way. So, a great ramble for all the children and teenagers in the hall. Another one for all parents, uncles, aunts, and grandparents.
Un grande rumble!
And another ramble for all the representatives of foreign associations. There are representatives from 23 countries. That sounds great. And another one for all doctors and researchers.
Un grande rumble per le...
And another one for companies, for all company representatives.
Last but not least.
And last but not least, another one, a big one for the staff.
Fantastico, che belle
Well, you all sound great. Let's try and do the same thing, but in a better structured way. Only the red ones, please, only the red ones. Only the orange ones now. Only the light green ones. The dark green ones. Purple. Red again, red again, red again, orange, bright green, dark green. Only rattles. Okay. So now we are not going to ramble all day, of course. So let me tell you about the pace, the rhythm that we're going to keep. So this is what it will sound like.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. All together. Proviamo. Let's try. Pronti, via. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Ok, ancora. 1, 2.
Once again.
1, 2. 1, 2, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Molto bene. Last time, ultima volta. Pronti? Ready? Go. 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Ok, questo sarà il
So this is going to be what we're going how we're going to play at the beginning, okay? But let me start by saying that every color has a different sound. So we're now going to write our own partition per color. So red, the red ones. Are you ready? So this is the red partition.
Doom, doom, sh, sh. Doom, doom, sh, sh. Doom, doom, sh, sh. Doom, doom, sh, sh. Sh. Solo rossi.
Only the red ones.
Molto bene, continuate rossi.
Very good. Keep going. Now the orange ones.
Arancioni, voi farete al contrario, quindi farete.
So the orange ones will go exactly the other way round, like this.
Molto bene, continuate.
So you keep going, okay? You both keep going. Without making it any faster, though. Okay, dark green.
Sentite come si sta costruendo la musica.
Can you hear the music? Keep going. The three sections, and now purple.
Verdi chiari.
Bright green.
Abbiamo il dada umpa. Pa. Pa. Wow! Ascoltatevi!
Listen to your own sound.
Yeah! Molto bene! 4, 3, 2, 1. Wow! Molto bene! Ma questa...
Well, that was just a rehearsal, because now we are going to play it for good. We're going to have the prelude, this very fat music time, and then the finale. Remember the beginning? Tell me the truth, okay? So, remember numbers, okay?
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Ok, tutti insieme. Ready, go. Molto bene. Per il finale.
Now, We're going to do exactly the same thing at the end, but with one beat more.
2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, ready, go! Ok, questo sarà il finale. Allora, siete pronti per il concerto?
So, ready for a concert? Okay, let me hear your voices.
Ok, iniziamo a suonare l'introduzione.
Okay, let's start with the intro, then all the red ones will have their time, then the orange, then the dark green, purple, and so on and so forth. And then we're going to play it all. So, intro all together. Then each section will have their own role, and then when I say go, we're going to play all together. Okay, ready? Rattles, are you there?
Introduzione. 1,
Intro.
1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Solo rossi.
Only the red ones. Only red.
Arancioni.
Orange.
Sonagli.
Rattles.
Verdi scuri.
Dark green.
Molto bene, viola.
Purple.
Verdi chiari.
Bright green.
Sonagli.
Rattles.
Aumentiamo un po' la velocità.
Let's make it faster.
Finale.
Let's close it up.
2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah! Rumble! Grazie mille!
Thank you all. Thank you all. Enjoy your conference.
Mi chiedono di dire ultimissima cosa. Chiedo scusa. Ultimissima cosa. Potete lasciare
You can leave the rattle. Well, you can have the rattles and of course the T-shirts. As for the hoses, please just leave them on the tables because they are mine. So I will go get them later. Thank you. Thank you.
Benvenuti e benvenuti.
Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ezio Magnano. Actually, I have been the president of Parent Project since last May after Luca Genovese. Therefore, let me thank him for what he has done. So let us all give him a big clap of hands.
Vi prego di scusare.
I hope you will excuse me for reading, but you can understand how nervous I am. So let me start by saying that when the board was to elect a new president, I was elected, and although I was very well aware of the association, and although I had been a member of the board for over 10 years, I got frightened. I was afraid of not living up to the expectations of what Luca and before him Filippo Buccella. Thanks, Filippo, by the way. I thought I could never live to the expectations of what they had done. And, of course, we must acknowledge Pat Furlong's work. We need to thank her, too. So I was afraid I could not be a good president for parents, for families, but our governance system helps face the fear. So I wish to thank all the other board members, Maria Rosaria Rollo, the vice president, Sara, Gianni,
Gerardo e Paolo, oltre ovviamente.
And of course Filippo and Luca, who are also members. I would particularly like to thank those parents and children who accepted being local representatives in spite of the time difficulties this may have engendered. Actually, one may face fear also thanks the cooperation of the many people who work, in our case, in the different areas of our association. Accountability, the secretariat, the relationships with the institution, and of course, Christina is above this all. They are all in this hall, and they have all made this possible. So I wish to thank each one of you. And there's another reason why I accepted this role, the most important one, I might add. I feel like I owe a lot to Parent Project because for the last 15 years they have done a lot for me and my family. We know that we have no cure, but thanks to the association, we can now cope with life despite muscular dystrophy. This has only been possible through Parent Project. So being the association president today is just another way of saying thanks, Parent Project, thanks to us all and to you all. And now the conference. So the shuttle may, once again fly over our heads to carry the researchers who work for us. Actually, I wish to thank Italfarmaco and other sponsors like Platinum and others, of course, but also Sarepta Therapeutics, including the other sponsors that are listed in the relevant brochure. I would also like to say thank you to Vanna Laura, Alessandra, Simonetta, and the other interpreters who are part of the interpreters team. Without them, we could not understand the contents of the speeches and presentations. And by the way, all speakers are kindly requested to speak slowly. Thank you very much. Thank you. The interpreters thank the President. It is beautiful to see so many of our children here. They are children, but they are supposed to, take their own life in their hands, and this should be more and more so the case. DMD and BMD will hopefully not take the leading role any more. Hopefully, the years, the bad years are behind us, hopefully again, because our social relationships have been diminished, and of course medical care has also been reduced because of the particularly complex years we've gone through. But precisely thanks to that, our community has found its real value. We never stopped. We kept supporting families in the different technological ways available to us. So being here today makes us truly, truly happy. These past few years have also seen a reduction of clinical research funding, but let me tell you, and I'm very happy to do so, that this year, also thanks to the funds for Amanti and Cannella from our own community, a bid of 320,000 euros will come out next spring for scientific research project, and this is a parent project initiative. Just a couple of more words. If we can do that, it's mainly because of the funding initiatives that are taken by many of our families. I'm thinking in particular of the recent Christmas campaign and the one that is starting in these very few days, the so-called Easter campaign. So you can't really be on a diet if you are a member of Parent Project. But I would very much like to have the many families who are not part of these campaigns to actually, come on board. We need you all. We need you all to build our children's future because, as our catchphrase goes, together we are the future. Now, it is also true that in these past few years we have invested a lot in some key projects for our children. Let me mention here in particular the one that regards a set of data that you will find in the Parent Project Patient Registry. It is a very important tool, and we should always stress that. Let me talk to you in particular about a cardiological telemedicine project and the counseling initiative for legal and bureaucratic issues. So once again, I would like to welcome you all. You come from 23 countries all over the world. I'd like to, thank you for being here, for those who are in the streaming mode. And I would particularly like to welcome the newcomers. Hopefully, our days here will, be full of smiles and possibly even of tears. You may get some of the answers to your questions, to the fears that, of course, all BMD and BMDs and DMDs carry with them. Parent Project will hopefully be your reference, your family, actually, your home. So let me close by congratulating the real protagonists, those who are really hitting the headlines for the active role that they play in this society that may often not welcome them. So let's give a big hand to our BMD and DMD children. And now we can officially start our 20th conference. The title is Together We Are the Future. Tiziana Dauria will now have the floor. She is responsible for the local Duchenne communities and the Duchenne counseling at a national level. So I wish you a fruitful conference. Thank you for your attention. Tiziana, you have the floor.
Intanto che Tiziana e tutti gli ospiti della sua tavola rotonda
As Tiziana and the other members of the round table come to the podium, let me draw your attention onto two sheets that you'll find on the table. First of all, you may, frame the QR code to read the digital program. And then by doing the same thing, but with another QR code, you can donate, as Ezio has just said, for our initiatives to actually come true, to be truly tangible. We need money, so you can use the different ways of donating, including the immediate one through PayPal, for example, or through a bank wire. Again, the QR code will take you to our website. And let me also recall at this stage that we are also going to have some parallel sessions both today and tomorrow, and there are some kids labs, namely at 10 today we're going to have our first music therapy lab. Orange 1 is the name of the hall where this will take place. The parallel sessions will be starting one at 11:30 at the Pergamo hall. Thank you very much for being here once again. Enjoy your conference.
Allora, buongiorno. Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, everybody. So before starting our session, there is a cell phone number of the listening center. It is a phone number to send all the questions for the round table. So mark it and also write the questions so that the colleagues will be reading for you. we start this round table. The title of the round table, taking the family caregiver to heart. So the attention will be focused on the role of the caregiver, because when in 1996, I mean, when Parent Project started, it was just a parents' association. Then over time, it became an association of parents and children. So we'll have contributions by experts, by moms, by the boys themselves, telling us, sharing with us their experience. The first contribution is by a journalist, an analyst, and a social worker. Carlo Giacobini needs no introduction. Many of you know him. And as from this year, thanks to a project together with a social cooperative, the name of which is Esplicando, we started a cooperation with Carlo to try and give more appropriate answers to the questions we receive as listening center. So Carlo is close to us, to the workers and the families in this area. Now we give the floor to Carlo himself. Thank you. Thank you also for your kind introduction. And I will stand so I can better see you all, and you can see me. It is an honor for me to be the first to speak. So I hope not to do anything wrong. I'm sure there will be questions and doubts. Family caregivers is a big subject. And the legislator has tried to step in. There were two legislators that have been unable to draw up a provision that could really be helpful to families. And then there was a sort of definition at the end of the legislature that was the one before last. I mean, very generally indicating what we mean by family caregiver when we speak about situations such as ours. We are still on the definition of words. 2017. There was the definition you know all about. It is a very general definition, a person caring for a family member who is not self-sufficient and has a disability. So this is the general definition to which other provisions are to be linked. Then, former definitions, former provisions, were never approved. I mean, one legislature after the other. So there is no specific provision for family caregivers. I mean, for people who care for a family member with, situations that may also be very different between them. So we are ready for a future definition of this role. We have a consultative committee at the EU level, and they expressed an opinion, and I'm drawing some element from this opinion. And also, since you are the people directly involved, maybe these are also ideas you can think about, also in view of some future provision. Well, the numbers first. Eurostat tells us about the numbers. Eurostat is the European equivalent of ISTAT. There was a survey in 2018 speaking of a very high number of people that care for family members. 100 million people. Very often these are children, but it is very significant that these there are lots of people who have some form of disability or are in some way not self-sufficient.
Vado molto velocemente, quindi anche rispetto a questi dati c'è un problema legato
So there is a problem. There is also a gender problem. There again, the caregiver activity mostly involves women, mothers, wives, daughters, and that for a variety of cultural reasons that are to be reconsidered also in view of a different gender policy. So many of these caregivers are in fact women, and this has a number of consequences. We're going to speak about them. Then health. A caregiver activity prolonged over time, an intense activity as a caregiver is the cause of heavy physical stress. So not only psychological stress, emotional overload and so on and so forth, but also physical stress. So it produces physical effects. That was an idea that was then supported by a number of research data. So there is also this effect in terms of cost, because there is this overload when the situation of being caregiver goes on over time. Is it a job or isn't it? Well, it is a hidden sort of job, because people are forced to give up their own job, to give up their own career, or shifting to part-time jobs. All these effects then, well, have a price over time. They have a lesser social security, a lower social security coverage, and so they find themselves in a situation of social dependency in a matter of, I don't know, 20 or 30 years. So a future provision is to consider that as well. I mean, it is supposed to compensate for this absence of coverage. Stereotypes. You know, sometimes stereotypes are inside ourselves. We are absolutely convinced that as for care, it is an unavoidable destiny. It is a way to express our affection. So there is a sort of confusion between affection, dedication, a generous approach, and a confusion with all the negative aspects that this giving care may take up. This is something we must take into account if a political decision is to be made. Very rapidly, because Tiziana is looking at me and she wants me to stick to my time limits. The other stereotype is personal autonomy. I wish to, well, invite Parent Project to start thinking about that. This sort of forced care. I criticize the social policies and the policies of a given nation. I give you no alternative solutions. I don't give the possibility of building the autonomy of my child, of enabling him to have a number of opportunities outside the family, in parallel with the family, together with the family, but, well, easing the burden of care. Well, that is another stereotype. If I had more possibility, I wouldn't be obliged to give up my job or limit my activities. So it is a forced choice. It's not just a matter of generosity and affection. It is a sort of blackmailing, because it is more than that. I mean, that is not the only reason why you become a caregiver. This idea, I devote myself entirely to my son. Later on, we'll have the contribution of psychologists that will make a number of considerations as to one's own future and the future of one's own family, because there is that total or significant absence of other possible alternatives. I wish to insist on this idea: caregiving and independent life. The two things are linked together. The more I can favor the independent life of the person, of the boy, of the person who is moving towards an adult life in terms of personal autonomy and activities, and in order to achieve that, you must reduce the role of family caregivers or the parenting role. The more I invest on autonomy, the less I must be present. We cannot speak about things in separation. All things are linked together: autonomy, family caregiver, family life. We must start projects of independent life, which also means investing directly on family caregivers. Well, well, they were thinking about future legislation, so they put some money aside for future legislation, and then there was the cascade of COVID and the pandemics. Now there are no specific provisions, but we can hand out these funds so that they can represent a contribution for family caregivers, and that's precisely what happened. In 2021, 22, and possibly in 23, the regions had funds earmarked with specific calls for family caregivers, but they set such stringent criteria that I don't know, even in this room, how many of you could get these funds. They are really minimal, and there again, it was money transfer to families. So let's have a look at what's going to happen in the next few years. There are caregivers that are better than others, so to speak. They have a different role due to the person they care for, the number of hours, the age, because it's a different story to care for a caregiver of a young boy with Duchenne, or the husband who is tetraplegic and has a different situation, and even more so if you are to care for an elderly person. So the situations are extremely diversified. So some distinction is to be made, not so much to give more to one versus the other, but to taper the interventions, to dose the intervention. Well, one might say, well, we must concentrate on the caregiver, but I must also work on the chances for these boys to get to an independent life. So we must make this effort, understanding that the caregiver role with the autonomy. So we cannot have specific criteria for one or the other, because fragmentation is meaningless. The two things are intertwined. Different tools, but the same objective. The objective is a dignified life for all. The boy that is growing up, the teenager that is becoming an adult, the people who are caring for him, and letting all these people to making all these people able to lead a full life. Now I give back my microphone. Thank you.
Grazie Carlo.
you, Carlo, especially for keeping your time schedule. And now we're going to listen to a 20-year young man from Pordenone, northern Italy. He has been with us on several occasions, also thanks to his especially flamboyant personality. This is not his first time as a testimonial here. So, Jacopo Verardo, you have the floor.
Ciao, ciao a tutti.
Hello, everybody. Well, first of all, let me tell you, it is a great pleasure for me to be here today and see so many of you being here. I'm going to tell you about my personal university experience. I'm going to tell you how I have managed for that, and then I will hopefully come up with some thoughts about autonomy. I have been a student of the communication department of the University of Padua since October. But I am from Pordenone, and therefore I had to find the place to stay in Padua. It took a few months for that to, happen. But I felt like I should learn how to be a university student just like any other university students. Actually, I was at high school when I first realized I was supposed to think of my own life from an autonomy perspective. Mainly, my goal was, because of that, to find someone helping me, a caregiver, an assistant. So I started my research. I published several ads, and then through Facebook and Instagram, I finally got to get in touch with someone who, asked me some more detailed information. So I started to see some light, if you wish, at the end of this tunnel. I thought, well, maybe I'll find this someone sooner or later, which actually happened. And then I was almost, halfway through. I just had to find a place to stay. But actually, the university has basically some hostels for students that also have accessibility facilities for people like me, and so it was not that difficult. As for traveling, well, of course, trains were the best way, and actually the train is possibly the only means of transportation whereby someone who has a reduced mobility can travel in full autonomy. And then, also thanks, of course, to my parents' help, I, managed to make my dream come true. I can now live in an autonomous way. I'm not supposed to constantly ask for my parents' help. So 3 days a week, I live outside of home. So now a few thoughts, hopefully useful for families and kids, young men and women who are here today and who may want to do the same. Actually, you must try and find your own autonomy. But for that to happen, you need to have a plan, and always consider that this plan must be viewed from the viewpoints of its many details. And flexibility is a key word. You may have to adjust to the different situations which may, not mirror your own home comfort. And then try not to always think of the dangers you may come across. Otherwise, you'll find it very hard to actually go out. Why is autonomy so important? Well, disability is part and parcel of what I am, but this is no reason why it should hamper my dreams, expectations, and projects. Autonomy makes us free and proud, and therefore satisfied of one's own life. Otherwise, I will probably be a sad and angry person because of my disease, because I would always be thinking of the many things that I cannot do that, on the other hand, other people can do. So I think it is really important to be autonomous. But of course, we know that disabled people have special needs that must be taken into consideration. But I have decided I should, learn how to depend on myself, to count on myself. I know my parents are always there for me. I know they can always respond to my needs independently of where I am or who I am with. And then another important aspect of autonomy, at least this is what I think, is that being autonomous allows you to start an educational and personal growth oriented experience. You're not at home, therefore you must manage your own time, your own activities, and you may have to cope with difficult situations. And you'll have to, know how to do that. So to conclude, if you want to be free and happy, stick to your dreams, try and find the proper ways to make them true, the proper strategies, and keep believing in your dreams. Never give up. And one more thing, really, to conclude. Well, I don't want anybody to tell me, "Good, look, you are a hero." I am no hero. I want to be like any other, a young man. I want to, know that I have my own strengths and weaknesses. Thank you.
Grazie, insomma, come vi avevo
Thank you. You have heard what Jacopo had to say and his message in the different dialogues we had. There is a sentence I want to go back to. Disability is part of myself, but it must not hinder my dreams, projects, and desires. And this is the message he leaves with us today for the next few days and for our future at large. And now, a mom from Rome, Daniela Gallo. And we invited her because Carlo mentioned the caregiver bonus, and she's one of the moms who had access to this allowance. It's not a lot of money, but it can be a help to organize the family life at best, the family and the boy's life at best. Good morning. My name is Daniela, and I am the mother of Lorenzo. Lorenzo will be 20 very soon. I was called by Parent Project to speak about my experience on the demand for this social allowance. The first time I submitted this demand, and I did it all on my own, I downloaded the form and I asked my neurologist to fill up the form, but they refused because the certificate hadn't got a sufficient score to get this allowance. When Lorenzo was 18, we moved to the area of adults with disability, and there, for this taking in charge, we had to submit Lorenzo to a number of visits. So the neurologist filled up the same form, and the certificate was then okay, and so I was able to submit my demand, and I entered the list of the people who would be given this allowance as caregiver. That was in 2021. In 2022, my municipality called me and they told me that my request had been accepted, and so we would start getting this bonus, this allowance. Since we have also home care, the amount of this allowance would be slightly reduced. Both my husband and myself work. He works full-time, I work full-time, so we have our own work timetables, and managing Lorenzo's days with all the things he has to do is not simple. With Lorenzo, I organize my own timetable with the carers' timetable, and when we are unable to put everything in, our relatives help us out. As parents, we have always insisted on making Lorenzo as autonomous as possible, and these allowances enable us to manage that. For example, going out with friends or going away with the carer, for example. So the carer becomes a member of our family, part of our family life. And so we must build a relationship of trust between the carer and the boy, the carer and the parents. It's not simple. It is a long way to go. I was asked what has changed for me at the physical and personal level since we got to this caregiver bonus. Well, at the physical level, absolutely nothing. At the mental level, yes, something did change, because it enables me to manage my own life, going on with my job, have some hobbies, knowing that there is a caregiver, a qualified caregiver replacing me. The caregiver, well, if you have all the prerequisites, it's absolutely okay to ask for the caregiver and obtain a caregiver. It must be a support to make our children as autonomous as possible. Thank you.
Ringrazio Daniela per il suo intervento.
I wish to thank Daniela for her contribution. Certainly, one of the sentences I want to underline is the following: if the parents feel well, the boys feel well as well. So the boys must not be seen as kids, but as adults, people growing up towards adulthood, anyhow. And so this is one of the messages we want to remember from Daniela's contribution. And now I'm going to introduce a young man who is here for the first time because he has never attended a parent project conference, and apparently is very shy. But when we invited him, well, he immediately accepted to share his story with us. So now I introduce Alberto Di Grazia. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here. Today, I'd like to share with you my experience with my assistant over the years. I'm going to read, sorry, because I'm a bit too tense to speak off the cuff. The first time I was introduced to my assistant Vittorio, I was 12. But who is this man? What does he want? Why would I need him? Anyhow, my first approach was showing him a game on the Xbox. Then, sometime later, we started going to the social cooperative that is called La Rota, where I met with young people my own age, and we became friends, even though I was very shy, very closed, and I didn't feel like speaking about my disease and my physical conditions. I feel much better at the cooperative than at school, because my schoolmates could only see my chair, and I was not treated as a peer. And now and then we used a game that was a content point with the other players, and that solved the problem of my being an introvert. And I also increased my autonomy, because after some time I decided to shift from the manual chair to the electric chair. After some years, we left that cooperative La Rota and we started cooperating with the Legnano section of the IDM, is the Union for the Fight Against Muscle Dystrophy. And there, thanks to the universal civil service that is made up essentially of people who are my age, I was able to increase my abilities and my social skills. And over the years I spent there, I was able also to manage a number of projects and activities, both in isolations and as groups. I have become able to manage some aspects of my independent life. I was given some responsibilities over the last year. I am now a member of the board, and so it is an important role, an important activity within the association. In these years, I have changed enormously. I've improved in a number of ways, but I'm absolutely convinced that I can improve even further. All that has been made possible thanks to my parents and also to Vittorio, that is my assistant, because they all believed in me, in my capabilities, in my skills, and they supported me over the years. Thank you.
Allora, io ringrazio Alberto per il suo intervento.
I wish to thank Alberto for his words, and I'd also like to say that for a few years we have set up a special, kids board inside our association. So I believe that it would be very important for you to be part of this group. It's a good opportunity for you to grow within the framework of the Parent Project Association. You may want to be introduced to the other members who are here today. So if you so wish, you may engage in this project too. Thank you.
E adesso, dopo che
And now, after Alberto, we're going to listen to his mom, who's going to tell us about what the situation is like in other regions too in Italy. So she's going to tell us about the choices that families may have to make, not very easy ones, because of the, of course, bureaucracy involved. Sometimes families ask for something innovative, which is challenging on a per se basis. So Cettina Ali has the floor.
Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning. I'm going to read too, because I'm nervous enough. So, every day as parents, we are called up to making choices that may have some rebounds on the future of our children, in my case, Alberto. And we had to, face up a challenge. So there's a special fund that is given to our kids in the region of Lombardy. But you can ask to be involved in a conventional project, or in a more innovative one, which of course was more difficult to be carried out. But we've always wanted Alberto to be fully autonomous. We want him to have, to be involved in his own activities, having, of course, a caregiver, an assistant, being with him. It was difficult at the beginning. It would have been much easier to have access to the funding for caregiving, but this one was more innovative and therefore involved some risks. But we never lost courage, and therefore our own assistant wrote down a highly detailed project, and everything was, went smoothly. The project was approved. I felt relieved because during that phase of his own life, Alberto needed someone not from within the family, helping him through new experiences. Our relationship with this assistant was immediately very, very clear and orbited around the goals to be achieved. And Alberto and his assistant were to make up their own choices. I decided I shouldn't play the typical role of the worrying mother. Not very easy, I might add, but apparently, that was the best solution. Vittorio is the name of our assistant. He is in the hall too. So Vittorio is a special person, a highly sensitive and professional man. Actually, autonomy and know-how have made it possible for Alberto to grow up, also thanks to Vittorio's help. He is now an adult. So as a parent, I am very happy with this experience, and therefore I suggest you should do the same for improving your children's life and future.
Grazie per il contributo.
Thank you. And now, let me give the floor to Giada Perinel, a colleague of mine. She will not be here in presence. Actually, you can see her behind my back. She has been a cooperator of a parent project for a few years, and she works in the northern Italian region of Lombardy. She knows Vittorio, she knows Alberto. Well, actually, Vittorio has been cooperating with us for quite some time, namely through some local projects involving the families. So Giada Perinel will tell us she will be picking up on what has already been said so far, but she will also dwell upon the notion of caregiving. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Tiziana, and good morning, everybody. Well, we've just listened to our moms and children talking about the social and bureaucratic aspects of caregiving. Let us now go a bit deeper into that. Actually, we're going to talk about the psychological aspects connected to this topic. So I'm going to share my screen so that you'll be able to watch my presentation as I am giving it.
Ok. Partiamo prima di tutto.
So, who is a caregiver? First of all, was Dr. Giacobini has previously said that caregivers used to be, family figures dealing with patients. The word comes from the English to care and to give. So basically, caregivers are supposed to be the persons caring for a particularly vulnerable person, thereby helping this person be involved in the several activities that the person is supposed to carry out. Well, today actually we have two different kinds of caregiver. The informal one, so family people or friends, and formal caregivers, namely highly specialized persons who care, who assist, and are paid for that, whether this happens at home or in hospitals or day care units. So the informal caregiver goes, along the different stages of the patient's life, and we know that DMD or BMD people's caregiving is very different from the one that is related, for example, to persons having dementia and therefore generally being elderly people. Now, there are different possible funds for that, but not very easy to have access to them. It is therefore difficult to get the proper, also economic recognition of this role, whereby caregivers may be, involved in a very bad distress condition that may have a bad impact on his or her own quality of life as well as the patient's quality of life. Now, the psychological aspects, let us consider them mainly considering caregivers in a general way, so not only of those who are paid for that, or actually who are helped, who are funded for that, and those who are not, because we know that the current regulatory status may not make that so easy. So, some other families, such as the Di Grazia family, may benefit from other measures whereby the formal caregiver is somehow matched by the informal ones. So we need that independently of the socioeconomic acknowledgement of this figure, the family caregiver is indeed a caregiver in his or her own right, whether they are parents or siblings or grandparents or wives, as it mainly goes for BMD patients. Now, for DMD and BMD, as we have said, there are some specificities not to be neglected. First of all, they are system diseases. In other words, they regard the single patient, but also the patient's family. So this is, this makes room for caregiving, if you wish. This is room for caregiving. And if we go a bit deeper into each one of the to diseases, we come across even further specificities. Namely, for DMD, we know that symptoms arise at first, then there's a clinical management, and this happens basically when the patient is very young. So the family caregiver is immediately involved in the patient's life. When new symptoms arise as time goes by, and this may change, of course, from on a case on a single case basis, well, this involves that the caregiver must psychologically and practically constantly adjust to these new situations. As for BMD, we know that symptoms arise in a less well-defined way than it is the case for DMD. Therefore, such adjustment process is less neatly defined here. But of course, this may actually make things even more complicated, because you may not clearly perceive the so-called locus of control. And then sometimes symptoms are not that obvious in BMD patients, whereby the caregiver may not consider the disease as such in full, and therefore basically engaging in a defense mechanism. Now, again, about caregiving, well, the aspects here are of two kinds, as I've said, the practical ones and the psychological ones. As for the practical ones, well, first and foremost, I don't know, the cooking of the meals. As for the psychological ones, well, they are the main, topic of my presentation. Therefore, I might mention, the management of one's own perceptions and of the patient's perceptions, but also the presence at some given specific times of the patient's process, the time when the diagnosis comes, the different ages that the patient shows as this goes by, but also the need for making such a diagnosis come into the life of the whole family. Practical aspects dealing with the worries about the future, the conflict between dealing with the patient and dealing with oneself, because caregivers have their own life. Sometimes guilt arises too, which is particularly typical of the caring mothers, or maybe shame or frustration, and of course the need to live up to the expectations of ideal parents, so to speak. Daniela has said that parents are caregivers, from the beginning. Actually, family caregivers are mainly the parents for different reasons. Well, first of all, because parents give their children's life, so this is possibly the main reason, and it particularly goes with the DMD, where as we know, diagnosis comes at a very early stage. So the parent is the first keeper, if you wish, of the being there of the disease. The parent, goes along this process together with the child, and of course provides him with some practical assistance, of course. Parents know their children very well, and of course they have a direct contact with all those who somehow orbit around their children's life. So, caregiving parent may certainly establish a very, good, meaning trust-related relationship with the child. But of course, there are some criticalities too. Let me go through some of them. Well, first of all, the setting up of a special relationship with one's child, as though the parent could be the only caregiver, the only possible caregiver for that child, therefore, being hyper protective and so on and so forth. An internal conflict may arise, engendering anger and frustration, mainly derived from the need to having to cope with the child to the detriment of one's own needs. Sometimes there may even be some difficulties in accepting the disease. The focus is indeed disease oriented. The problem, the limits that and limitations rather than the child may have. And sometimes this may lead to under-evaluating the relevance of other caregivers who may be perceived as less trustworthy and less, willing to help. Then the pronoun we or us mainly regards the parent and the child and no longer the two parents, the married couple. And then sometimes a family caregiver does not pay proper attention to their own problems, whether they are physical or psychological, which may lead to burnout syndromes. Well, all of that may actually lead to the onset of psychological and even psychiatric symptoms. Now, Parent Project cares for caregivers. Actually, the first roundtable is precisely about this topic because caregivers are persons. They are persons as such, but they are also important as to the other persons that they may reach out to, because they are particularly vulnerable. And of course, a caregiver who listens to himself or herself is a person who learns how to cope with themselves too. So listening to their own needs, thoughts, emotions. Listening to oneself is indeed a highly relevant tool whereby to learn how to best help one's own children. So as caregivers, we need to constantly monitor how we are doing, both physically and psychologically. We need to work on the notion of being the only ones, rather making room for other caregivers. We need to care for the important relationships with one's own wife or husband, and of course a child. We may have to be honest and decide whether sometimes to have to give up to being a family caregiver, therefore nurturing other interests and passions, being members of of associations like Parent Project, to feel less lonely, and possible even to ask for specialized help. And you should never judge yourself as a family caregiver. Let me conclude with this quotation. So caregiving often calls upon our basing on a kind of a love that we never thought could be possible. Thank you.
Grazie Giada per
Thank you, Giada. That completes our roundtable. And I'd like to quote from your contributions when Daniela said, you are all caregivers from the very moment the baby is born. But that doesn't apply only to kids, because the caregiver is, in general, the person who cares. And now the floor is yours if you want to ask questions or you want to make a contribution. And there are my colleagues with microphones, so you just wave your hand and they will come to you with a microphone, or you can have the phone number of the listening center. So a question from Andrea. The question is for Carlo. How can we reach MPs to have legal provisions to regulate the role of the family caregivers? In my family, we cannot give up our jobs because of economic problems, and finding a caregiver, even just for a few hours a day, you need money, and families do not always have that money available. May I? Well, here we are speaking about strategy. What can we do? As a pressure group, if there are different needs and different organization, different approaches. So the word of people with disabilities also being adults with disabilities, where of course you have situations that are different from DMD. In DMD, there is the parent's responsibility, and so there are important aspects concerning parents. We have had 3 legislatures where they did absolutely nothing. In the legislature before last, there were 2 provisions, 2 bills almost ready on family caregivers. And there were 2 that were really very specific. And both of them put together a number of signatories in Parliament that was higher than an absolute majority that would have been able to approve the bill, to turn it into a law. And then there are practical difficulties whereby nothing was done. Well, you have the classic tool of lobbying, economic one. So what are you asking me as a family caregiver? You want just a recognition of the role, rights to access, rights that a parent, of course, already has in the contacts with the national health system, or with doctors, or with the school. Of course, that type of authorization is part and parcel of the simple fact of being a parent. And then there are the economic requests, and here is the classic situation. Parents cannot give up their jobs because they need the money, and the consequence of that is something that is unavoidable. So there is an economic aspect. They have to pay for the house, they have to pay for food, for clothes, I don't know, and the role played, I don't know, for 20 or 30 years by a sister, for example, vis-a-vis a person who has a severe disability, whereby that person has never been able to work. And in that case, you must foresee an allowance, you must foresee some form of social security, because that person has been unable to get a regular job because she had a role as a carer. And then there is, and at that point, if you want money, of course, you must define how much money is needed to cover that. And so when there is an economic aspect, well, first they must decide how much will that cost. With the contributions given to regions, they gave out very little money, and that is why they set very strict criteria. So lobbying on parliament, on MPs, but first you must look for economic coverage precisely to cover all that we need, and that is not an easy problem. We did find some 100 billion euros for credit bonuses. Well, you might want to find some money to invest on the family. It is a real investment because otherwise you would have in 30 years' time someone who is not covered by Social Security, or physical damages for these people in 10 or 20 years, having a family that has become destitute, because disability is one of the main elements for destitution. I'm not speaking of specific cases, I'm speaking in general. So deciding how much money you want to give to this type of investment, what is the possible action to involve MPs? It is a daily and continuous action of lobbying at government level, at MP level, at the regional level. Never give up, and we must try and find wider alliances to try and make it work. It was a difficult question because it also lobbying technique at that point. Andrea, being recognized family caregiving as a worker with real social security allowances, as is the case in some northern European countries. Well, don't think that in the rest of Europe things are so splendid. I want to share with you an experience of mine. I was writing that opinion for the Economic and Social Committee, the European Economic and Social Committee, that is a consultative body of Parliament and the Council. While I was writing that opinion, of course, we had a series of meetings with a number of European countries, from the Baltic countries to Hungary and France and whatever. And please, do not think that there is such a lot of money given to that. I mean, that is not the case in other European countries. There are interventions to fight impoverishment, to fight destitution, things similar to this citizenship revenue or minimum salary. But believe me, as for social coverage, so I am caring for that person for 20 years, and there are some people putting aside some allowances, some social contributions for me. We tend to think that in the rest of Europe there is paradise. It isn't the case. It is a myth. It is a myth, but it's not the case. It's not the reality. Well, first of all, good morning, Carlo. And we met as kids with Carlo. So even before Parent Project started in Italy, so we were really very, very young. And so this is a century-old commitment on his part. Well, I know you have been carrying out a daily battle on that. You have a huge experience in this field. Since inventing lobbying is not simple, a lobbying action is not simple, is there someone, is there a body, is there an authority, something we might become members of to, well, to exert a stronger pressure on these areas, someone who is doing well, that we might meet and try start a collaboration? Well, first of all, thank you for making me feel so young, saying that we have a century-old friendship, and reminding me how old I am, actually. Probably the first thing that comes to my mind is we may have an official position, a public and open stance, maybe also at the end of this conference, something very simple with a few items to underline this idea, independent life and building autonomy. The two young men who are sitting next to us on the podium are extremely relevant. I mean, what they said is extremely relevant. So that other people who may be working in different ways on these areas, there is some spontaneous committee, there is some organization that is doing something, so that we can become a critical mass, and so that our voices are heard, or having different voices, well, with the same message coming from different areas. In my opinion, all that was stronger 4 to 5 years ago, after the failure of those two legal provisions of those two bills that had become, in fact, a unified bill. And then when that failed and it never became a law, sort of the tension was exhausted, was no longer there. And then there is this sort of propaganda maneuver where they really gave us very, very little money through the regions, as if the issue had been solved that way. But I insist the criteria were extremely strict. Then I'm going to ask the lady sitting next to me how she managed to reach that score and that assessment. I'm not surprised that she had to go through it 3 times, possibly having some specialized assessments to get the appropriate score to get the money. So that might be a great idea. This is a subject that is of some interest for Parent Project in terms of political communication. And then, sooner or later, well, there will be, I don't know, a commission, a sort of round table at some ministry. In some cases, this round tables do work, or committees do work. In other cases, well, it is just predefined texts that arrive on those tables, as was the case for the law on disability. That was a sort of pre-packed thing, and so it was not really discussed at committee level. Another question? If you ask for a home caregiver, how many hours can you ask for? A caregiver and an assistant, is that the same thing? We have indirect support. The municipality of Rome provides two types of support, direct and the indirect support. The direct support is given by cooperatives. So there are cooperatives that work for the municipality of Rome and that have been under some sort of contract with the municipality. Then we were on this list for some years, and the municipality had first proposed a sort of indirect support. So they would give us a money allowance, and with that allowance we would pay for the caregiver, for this assistant. And we had been looking for this person for many years. With our caregiver, we cover some 15, 16 hours a week. 15, 16 hours a week. That is the amount of time. Personal caregiver could be me or her. The professional educator is a professional figure, and that has to do, I don't know, with living in autonomy, building autonomy. Well, and that is something different, and it is essential. It is a person with specific skills that carry out a given activity that favors I mean, is not replacing parents. It is something essential, especially for the transition into adult life. So this professional figure hasn't been recognized sufficiently as it should. That is really the educator that is different from the caregiver.
Good morning. My name is Lamia from Duchenne, Kenya, Africa. I have a question. Maybe one of the panelists can help me. My personal experience, when I'm working, I have a permanent job at work. I am a caregiver. I am a mom. I have a boy in hospital. I have a family that I'm taking care of. I have an organization, a patient organization, where many parents are waiting for me to give ideas, to give support. At one point, I felt psychologically I was going down because of very many things that I was handling. So maybe you can advise us, before we go to lobbying in our governments, which could take some time for support, in the immediate, as a caregiver, what advice, what are the immediate solutions can we implement so that we can support our health, our children's health, and also support our siblings in the family, and also extend the same support to the patient parents organizations in our countries, like in Africa, for example. Some ideas can be very good for me to take back home, because sometimes I feel I don't have an answer to a parent who is coming to me, yet I'm in the same kind of challenge, and they're expecting me to do so much for them. And I feel I'm overwhelmed. In the immediate, what are the possible solutions that we can implement? Thank you.
Scusate, aiuto un attimo I nostri relatori che sono sul palco, perché loro non hanno le
Unfortunately, the people who are on the podium were not wearing headsets, so Filippo is now translating into Italian what the lady just said.
Quindi è il punto di contatto per tutte le famiglie che si trovano nella sua area. Lei cerca di dare supporto a tutti quelli che si rivolgono a lei e tutti quelli che comunque hanno bisogno di aiuto, le famiglie che sono in Kenya. La domanda era: dirà, prima di fare un gruppo di pressione, andare a chiedere al governo, che insomma sicuramente è una cosa importante da fare, e la soluzione definitiva a tutti questi problemi. Come è possibile sostenere noi caregiver, noi famiglie, e aiutare le altre famiglie a reggere a questa pressione così forte? Non so se era tutto, ma è quello che mi ricordo, c'ho una certa età.
Anche questo è un compito molto ambizioso.
Well, that's a difficult question, of course, because, of course, if the role is properly recognized, well, this may help the whole of parent project associations to contribute to the well-being of the families, but also the counseling centers that may actually, remarkably support families through indications and so on and so forth. But of course, there may be a partial void there, in terms of local services to be provided locally. And by the way, let me take this chance to say that this is particularly true when it comes to foreigners living in Italy, whether they are asylum seekers or under humanitarian protection. So when disability goes hand in hand with being a foreigner, this makes it all much more difficult, in terms of language, in terms of bureaucracy, the permit of stay, and so on and so forth. So these are aspects to be considered too. So, what can I say? It has to do with, daily strategies, lobbying on a daily basis with the, relevant units or regulatory agencies. But once again, we need to embrace overall strategies to help single people or single families. One more question: how to involve school managers in training teachers?
Non ho capito le ultime due parole.
E come si potrebbe inserire?
And how a special subject matter can be included in the school curricula about the topic that we're dealing with here. So, on the one hand, you are dealing with the teaching of teachers, the training of teachers, if you wish, or the training of trainers, whereby special projects, special, educational pathways are established. Well, some steps forward have been made also within universities and within the framework of PhD projects. As for the other topic you have mentioned, well, I don't think disability should, make up a specific subject matter. I believe this should not be the case. Rather, disability should be considered as a cross-cutting topic. Whenever you deal with history or literature or civic education, you should include disability. I might add that in our counseling centers, we actually have some training courses for teachers. And of course, even, online training courses can be organized, of course, specifically pertaining to this disease, this condition. And then we also work with students. As for the more general topic of diversity, the reason why I'm saying this is that you can just get in touch with your own counseling center and suggest such initiative. Actually, teachers may not have all ever had to deal with such a condition, whereas this may make a difference. Well, here we're talking about, special events, special initiatives. One more question. I have a question for Jacopo. It's a technical question, if you wish. You said you use the train, right? You travel by train. So, Jacopo, you actually get on the train on your own, I mean, like any other university students. Can you tell us more about that? I mean, you are in Padua, you go to the railway station, then what? Okay, well, first of all, let me say that there is a negative side of the whole story, namely that you should get in touch with the so-called blue rooms, well, the so-called sale blu in Italian. Here there is the staff specifically devoted to coping with disabled passengers, so that they provide you with all the necessary instruments. Anyway, having done that, you get to the railway station where you find some staff members helping you get on the train. And then if you ask for anything you may need, for example, I don't know, take off your coat and so on and so forth, you can just ask and they will help you. Having done that, you are fully autonomous, and once you get to your destination, other station staff members will help you down the train, off the train. Well, you usually go from Pordenone to Padua, so we are in northern Italy, and I use a direct train. Otherwise, I would have to change at Mestre, which I have, by the way, sometimes, and it goes exactly, it goes on in the same way. And I have never had any problems, quite frankly. But let me say once again, of course, you need to tell the train station people, previously, which may be a problem, because if at this very moment I make up my mind about a train journey, well, I won't be able to engage in that. But otherwise, putting that aside, trains are the best ways, the best means of transportation for us.
Previous question, I would invite our children, young adults, to engage in school activity and help the educators. I think they are the best teachers to show what are the challenges and the difficulties in their daily approach in the school. And I know that in some countries this is happening, that groups of Duchenne children, young adults or adults almost, maybe even after the university, they go into schools and do teaching sessions to teachers, directors and colleagues of their peers, which is very, 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 very helpful.
Siccome Filippo non ha potuto
no, l'abbiamo già fatto. No, ma l'abbiamo detto.
va bene.
So if you...
First of all, my name is Dr. Golan. I am a pediatrician, but here I am as a parent of a 40-year-old Duchenne son in Israel.
Allora, è una pediatra che è anche mamma di un ragazzo con la Duchenne di 14 years.
40.
Oh, 40, un uomo con la Duchenne in Israele.
And he is a graduate of university.
È un...
Graduate.
Ah, è laureato all'università, ok.
Sì. And I invite our children to be active as activists, as here the parents are, to engage in this kind of activity in helping educating in the schools of the younger and help the teachers and the directors to learn about the dealing with this problem, and they are the best delegates doing a wonderful job. And I know some places in Israel there are groups like that active in schools.
E ha fatto un grosso lavoro di motivazione nelle scuole e con tutte le persone che ha incontrato per cercare di convincere chi incontrava a dare questo obiettivo all'istruzione e a seguire i propri sogni per poter costruire un'educazione e migliorare soprattutto le condizioni con cui questi ragazzi possono frequentare l'università e seguire un po' la loro formazione.
Thank you.
Quindi era un racconto di un'esperienza.
L'ultima domanda.
Sì.
Okay. Just one more question. Hello, my name, well, actually, I'm Gabriele's mom. Gabriele is 14 years old. I have always tried to be there whenever local initiatives were taken regarding our problems. Well, I live in Rome, in the northern part of Rome, where a special board has been set up, whereby we have sort of a direct connection with the local health unit that may provide with the funding to be used to pay for an indirect help. So I'm going to ask for some help, if you wish, because as the doctor, as the pediatrician has just said, I believe we should raise awareness among professionals. Maybe we'll want to, write down a sort of a list of the professionals, of the relevant professionals, because this is the most difficult thing, to find the right person to deal with the medical aspects of my child's condition, but also of practical issues. I don't know, helping him go out. The point is not really to accompany him, but to be there, for him to talk, after all, to appear. And I really found it very hard, but at last I came across a young man, a double graduate, but unfortunately he cannot be hired because he is not a professional educator. But I mean, these people are not found. These people are not to be found. So why shouldn't we try and raise awareness among professionals, drawing a list of the relevant people for us to find them more easily, thereby, helping our kids. I have always asked for, the municipal people, I mean, the municipal staff, I have always had to ask them for providing me with this figure, but that will not do when our child, gets 14, for example, turns 14. I mean, we often talk about training for our university students. Well, why shouldn't we include our situation in this training approach?
Una battuta al volo.
Very rapidly. It is something you know very well, of course. You, as we all know. Why do we have difficulties at finding assistance, at finding caregivers or educators or professional educators? It's not just a matter of numbers, but it is also, there is also an economic aspect. Not only they are not there simply they are not available, they because when we speak about professional educator, there is some confusion because the idea is that you care for a person with a severe disability. Maybe they think they have sanitary care. It's not the case. My son needs someone with whom to speak, for example. I was impressed by one of the people who took the floor, who had found a person, a friendly person. Sorry. We have no more time, and Carlo has another session tomorrow. It is a parallel session, so if you want to speak with him, there is another session with Carlo's participation that will be taking place tomorrow at 10:30, or you can use the phone number and write your messages, and you will get your answers after the end of the conference. Thank you all. And Gloria Antonini now is called to the podium. I wish to thank the speakers, and I wish to remind you to look at the program in all its parts, because it's very rich. It has activities that do overlap. So look at the program and you decide how are your days to be organized.
Buongiorno a tutti. Adesso cominciamo.
Good morning. And now we start with the scientific sessions, and it is a pleasure for me to call here the coordinator of the Renoir project. It is a European project funded by the European Union for the training of 13 PhDs all over Europe, the Training by Parent project. They are all here with us, and then Silvia will be introducing all of them. They are very young people. They work in basic research. They are our future. And so Silvia Brunelli is associate professor at the Milano Bicocca University in the area of medicine and surgery. Silvia, please speak slowly. Thank you for your attention.
Un'ultima cosa, chi ha dimenticato le cuffiette per la traduzione?
If you need simultaneous translation, the headsets are outside this room, in a room next door.
Per scorrere le diapositive abbiamo un telecomando? Grazie Gloria, grazie a tutti voi.
Thank you, Gloria. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. This year, I've been following your events in streaming over the years, and well, it's a great opportunity for me to introduce this European project. I am the coordinator of the project, and Parent Project is an active partner, because I'm very glad because the cooperation of Parent Project with me and my colleagues has been going on for almost 20 years. So this is another step in the right direction. The Renoir project is a training project, a research and training project that was funded by the 2020 Horizon program. And the objective
un programma di dottorato nel campo della
It is a PhD program in regenerative medicine, muscle regeneration and aging. We have devised Renoir, putting together 15 different organizations in 6 different countries, and they include both academic and industrial experts in the field of muscle regeneration, stem cells, and aging. These are only some of the people who are our researchers and supervisors of the different PhD courses. Some of them are here with us today, and obviously Parent Project is one of our I wouldn't say sponsors, but real active partners of the project. We thanks to the EU, we had these funds. The project started in 2020. Despite COVID, we were able to recruit 13 different PhD students. Here are our students. We have 13 PhD students. Many of them are here with us. Thomas, Philippa was, then we have Regina, Gwen, Irene, Noemi, Emilia, and Sarah. You have seen them at the registration desk. They are here among you. And they started working in the different labs starting in 2020. These students are involved in their PhD research programs. And what is the objective of this network? The main objective is studying the molecular mechanisms that are at the basis of the decline in skeleton and cardiac muscle mass and functionality. And they represent the most critical and complex features associated with human aging and disease. Muscle dystrophy, of course, but also other diseases, and as I've just said, aging. We know very well that understanding the basic mechanisms that give rise to these processes. This is essential to design geared trials aimed at improving these pathologies. And one of these clinical trials will be developed by Giulio Cosso, who is one of our members. So what are the specific objectives of this project? Well, first and foremost, seeing the different progenitor stem cells, identifying them very precisely, and trying to understand how they maintain or lose their identity when there is a pathology. And we do that by using animal models and imaging and cell imaging models. So we try and see the cells inside the muscle. Well, first of all, an essential factor for muscle regeneration is inflammation. In the next session, you will be hearing about how the inflammatory system can be affected to coordinate appropriate muscle regeneration. And what we try to do in our projects is seeing how the different cells of the inflammatory systems that are very different with different roles, how they can coordinate appropriate muscle regeneration. And if these processes do not work properly, so if the immune system is not working properly, we have a deficit in regeneration and fibrosis in the muscle and loss of function. We do that by using a variety of genomics approach. So we try to identify, let's say, cell by cell in the different muscle components, what is the gene expression, what are the gene expressed at the different moments in the appearance of the disease, at the onset of the disease and at the end of the disease, to try and find the molecules that may guide the destiny of cells in the muscle. And that can be used both to create models using biomaterials to build biodevices that mimic the muscle outside the muscle. So in vitro we can recreate artificial muscles so that we can study the effect of these molecules there. And then we use other biomaterials to have a better delivery, a better transfer in vivo, so in the animal. I mean, precisely of these molecules that we have already identified. Of course, the Renoir project is a training project, so it is essential to have a new generation of researchers that may have a wide knowledge about muscle regeneration with all the tools, bioengineering, molecular biology, animal models. And we do that precisely by training our PhD students and organizing courses and organizing scientific conferences. The next conference will be held in France, organized by Frédéric Relais, who is here with us. And as you know, it is very important for PhD students to be aware also of the reality of the disease and of the families that are behind this disease. So the involvement of these PhD students with parent projects is essential for their training and their future. So some of them have already attended last year's event that was an online event, but they participated in the organization. They are here this year, so you'll be seeing them. Go and talk with them. Some of them are Italians, some are not Italian, but they can share their experience with you. And we publicize their activities on our site and all the social channels. You see them listed. We have also a YouTube channel where we tell you about our progress in research and all the activities we are carrying out. That's it. Well, the best success for your conference. I'm very glad to be here with you. Thank you for your invitation.
Adesso facciamo una
Now we have a short break. The coffee break has just started, and we resume the session at 11:30. The staff members, well, okay, that must collect the tubes, must stay here because we must collect all the tubes that are left on the tables. Enjoy your coffee.
Stiamo per ricominciare. Gloria, dove sei? Cercasi Gloria disperatamente. Per favore, se... brava, ci siamo dimenticati. Per favore, se potete accomodarvi, dobbiamo iniziare la sessione, altrimenti andiamo fuorissimo con i tempi e non avrete diritto al pranzo. Chi non si accomoda non avrà la box lunch per il pranzo e andrà dritto senza mangiare fino a stasera, quando dovrà essere in maschera per forza alla nostra cena. E rischia di stare in maschera senza cena se non si accomoda immediatamente. A parte gli scherzi, invito Gloria e tutti i suoi relatori ad accomodarsi sul palco, così che vi possano intimorire e vi sentiate costretti a sedervi. Grazie per l'attenzione. Chi ancora non l'avesse fatto, ci sono le cuffie per la traduzione simultanea. Ne approfitto sempre per ringraziare le fantastiche Vanna, Laura e Alessandra e salutarle. Invito tutti a parlare lentamente, soprattutto quelli di noi che lo dicono e poi non lo fanno. E adesso davvero, Gloria e i tuoi relatori, prego, accomodatevi sul palco e iniziamo. Ok. Vai.
Buongiorno a tutti di nuovo. Adesso sta per
Welcome back. We're about to start with our second session, which is going to be our scientific session, how to improve muscle health and contrast inflammation and fibrosis. Now, in the Pergamo room, there will be a parallel session at the genetic diagnosis in pregnancy for women carriers. So pre-implantation and planning, pregnancy planning for carrier women. So we have here the speakers, Dr. Catenuccia of the Bambino Gesù Hospital of Rome and Emilio Albamonte of the Nemo Clinical Center of Milan. So they are our speakers, and I'd like to invite the representatives of the companies who will be ready here to answer any questions you may have after these first presentations. So please, now we're about to get started. Please, a little quiet. And we have Italfarmaco represented here, Anna Belesque, Antisense, Michela Guglieri, and she will be here representing the 4DMD study. ZJ. The name is hard to pronounce, and we hope we haven't mispronounced it too badly. She's here for Santera, and we have also Edgewise represented here. So thank you all, and we'll come back to you later. And now I'll give a very short presentation on muscle health and how to address inflammation, and then our clinical presentations will go much more into detail. Can we have the first slide, please? Here you have the names of our speakers. I've already introduced them. And so let's start now. And let's try to take stock of where we are now. You know that when there is an absence of dystrophin, then there is a cascade of events that is triggered that leads to steady inflammation and a number of other degenerative events involving the muscle tissue. Here we'll be looking at therapeutic strategies that aim at addressing, contrasting these inflammatory processes. So we'll be looking at some strategies that can improve the muscle's resistance and function, other strategies to limit the entry of calcium into muscle cells or to reduce inflammation, and other strategies, again, that specifically inhibit fibrosis. And in the next slide, we'll see a diagram representing what I've just explained. So lack of dystrophin, the cascade of events, and their different therapeutic strategies at each step, as you can see represented in this slide. And today we will be starting with the strategies that work, we say, downhill. So let's have a look. Our clinical experts will explain this process very clearly, but up in the upper slide you see healthy muscle. After contraction, it is able to repair itself and to leave behind an inflammatory state. Dystrophic muscle instead is in a state of persistent inflammation, and that will lead to the development of fibrotic tissue, which will accumulate. The only strategy, the only drug that is recommended by the international guidelines from the age of 4 onwards is, as you know, cortisone. And we will have Dr. Albamont explaining clearly the benefits and also the side effects of glucocorticoids. It's very important to follow the indications that are given by clinicians very carefully when they recommend introducing cortisone as of age 4. And we're quite proud in our country because cortisone is included in the therapeutic protocols, and the cost is not covered by patients. In other countries, this is not always the case. And this is the law that did introduce glucocorticoids as a therapeutic indication, which is different from the indications that are authorized in Italy. And this was the basis, the foundation for the introduction of this form of treatment in Duchenne muscular dystrophy patients. So we'll have Dr. Albamenti explaining how the glucocorticoids work. They are essentially anti-inflammatory. There are side effects, but working with your trusted clinicians can do much to alleviate these side effects and to manage them. Therefore, families often are very worried about the side effects that they observe, but a word of advice that we feel very confident in giving is that collaborate with the physicians who are following your children. So thank you all for this, your attention to this very first introduction. I'd like to thank Fernando de Alvarez and all those from the scientific office who've followed us. Others will be joining us later, like Fernanda. But now we'll have the first presentation, the first scientific presentation.
Buongiorno, ringrazio innanzitutto.
Thank you. Thank you for your introduction. Thank you for having invited me here today to deliver this presentation. And I will start by trying to give you an update on the developments in the area of these drugs. You see them listed here, Givinostat, EDG 5506, and you saw the others. So let's start with the very first. What is Givinostat? It is an inhibitor of HDAC, the histone acetylate. Now, what you know is that there's a lack of dystrophin in the muscle tissue in Duchenne's disease. This leads to increased damage to fibers, increased also of HDAC, and it leads to an altered expression of the genes that are involved in muscle regeneration. And this muscle damage, and with a damaged, impaired reparation system, leads to the muscle being replaced with fatty tissue and fibrotic tissue. This drug, Givinostat, acts downhill from the genetic disorder, and it inhibits the acetylase and therefore promotes muscle regeneration with expression of genes that can help promote muscle regeneration. And it will reduce the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines and also reduce fibrosis. And this is potential treatment for all patients with both Duchenne's and Becker's muscular dystrophy, irrespective of their genetic disorder. And here we see the results of preclinical studies that were carried out using murine models, and also after 1 year of givinostat treatment in phase 2 studies. Here we see that histology findings showed an increase in the diameter of the muscle fibers, reduction in inflammation and fibrosis, and better performance, motor performance. In the phase 2 study, after 1 year of treatment, we saw in histological examination there was an increase in the diameter of the muscle fibers, regenerating tissues, reduce tissue damage and inflammation, and also fatty deposits. And the magnetic resonance showed a slower progression of disease in the patients treated with givinostat compared to data reported in the literature. And here we see a phase 3 study, DSC 14-235748. Here was a randomized double-blind study, parallel groups, placebo-controlled, 179 ambulant subjects treated for 18 months with givinostat or placebo in a 2-to-1 report. This study was carried out in a number of countries in Europe, as well as the United Kingdom, Israel, Canada, and the United States. After a screening period of about 4 weeks, the treatment period was initiated with the drug or the placebo for 72 weeks, and it was followed by an open-label study in which the treated group continued to receive the drug. The placebo group initiated treatment with givinostat. It is a drug that is administered orally in the form of a cough syrup, and here we see that the primary target was to preserve muscle mass and slow down disease progression. And these were the enrollment criteria: the age, 6 to 17, ambulant with a genetically confirmed diagnosis, any mutation, stable treatment with steroids over 6 months, the 4-step test under 8 seconds, and time to rise between 3 to 10 seconds. There was also supposed to be a selection of a target population, subjects for whom the forecast was not to lose ambulation in the subsequent 18 months, but at the same time to experience a decline in their physical ability and motor ability over the subsequent 18 months. So the primary and secondary endpoints were assessed after 18 months of treatment with givinostat compared to the placebo treated in the target population. We had the endpoints, and we had spectroscopy and the other treatments. And here we have the different steps, the different tests. The 4-step test for the primary endpoint. Secondary included the North Star Ambulatory Assessment, loss of ability in executing NSAA, variations in the time to rise, variations in the 6-minute walking time, variations also in the strength for knee extension or elbow extension measured with manual mitometry. We also had spectroscopy studies. Outcomes: the drug, as had happened in the phase 2 study, showed that it was had a good safety profile. 112, 94.9% of the group had TEAE that was moderate. Most of the adverse events were moderate or slight. Only 8 patients had to discontinue because of adverse events that were not, however, considered to be drug correlated. Those receiving a higher dose at student entry had thrombocytopenia observed in 12 cases, 21.8%, a reduction of platelets in 16. The most common side effects in about 1 out of 10 patients included diarrhea, platelet reduction, thrombocytopenia, abdominal pain, and increased triglycerides. The study did meet the primary endpoint. The average of time for the 4-step test at 18 months of treatment showed a difference between the Givinostat group. You see that in green column. Placebo is pink, and you see the result, 1.78 p-value. You see there, it is statistically significant. And we saw a slower decline in this activity for the treated group. Here we have secondary endpoints which were consistent with the primary endpoint. And here in this graph you see on the right-hand side the different measurements and the targets that were favorable for the Givinostat, and on the other side you see those that were in favor of the placebo group. And you see that the 4-step test showed a difference in terms of the total score, North Star score. We see the you see the results. We also have the fatty mass at the magnetic resonance. These were significant. In other words, we saw a trend that was favorable for Givinostat, though lesser statistical significance. Here we see that Givinostat can reduce roughly by 40% the decline in the North Star test. And at 18 months of treatment, the difference in terms of North Star shows a delta of 1.91 with a basal loss of 2.5 points in the Givinostat, 4 in the placebo group. And looking at here we see the group of treated group 3.4, 5.6 was the figure for the placebo group. So all of these results are considered to be clinically significant on the basis of the database on the natural progression of disease. If we look at these other items, we see that Givinostat can reduce the deterioration of North Star activities, the most relevant ones, with the patient's disease stage. You see the different items that are lost at an earlier or later stage. And here, if we look at that, ranked in this way, we see, looking at the pink line, that the percentage of patients with a loss in one limb in the North Star is much lower for Givinostat compared to the placebo, especially for the most important items, such as jumping on one foot, rising on one leg, rising from a chair, standing on one leg, rising from bed, etc. So, regarding magnetic resonance here, we observed that Givinostat reduced the fat infiltration in the muscle by about 30%. And the results obtained with magnetic resonance, MRS spectroscopy, and the Dixon method, MRI, showed that the drug can reduce fatty infiltration in all of the thigh muscles, which are essential for walking. So this will lead me to my general conclusions. The study did meet the primary objective and was consistent with the other secondary objectives. It confirmed that the drug is well tolerated. Adverse events can be treated by remodulating the dosage. The impact of Givinostat in DMD on aggregate data had already shown in phase 2 an increase in muscle fiber diameter and reduced fibrosis. This was confirmed by a reduction in fatty infiltration observed in the phase 3 in spectroscopic magnetic resonance, and also confirmed clinically, both in the primary endpoint and improvement in the other functional tests. So currently, the study is still ongoing in an open label phase. The patients will continue to receive the treatment as long as the product is on the market. Italfarmaco is continuing to work on the development of the drug, and soon a study will be launched involving patients, non-ambulant DMD patients. And Dr. Bettica will answer any questions you may have on this later on. Now, regarding this other molecule, EDG 5506, this is a very small molecule that has been designed to protect muscle fibers from the damage induced by contraction, which is a distinctive feature of the pathology, and therefore promote integrity and muscle function. The specific target are the fast muscle fibers, the ones that are most susceptible, most prone to being damaged. And what happens actually in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy? Mechanical stress, because of the lack of dystrophin, can lead to muscle fiber damage, and this will lead to an increase in release of muscle damage biomarkers in the plasma, replacement of muscle with fat and fibrosis, reduction of the muscle mass, and all of this, of course, leads to reduced muscle function. This EDG 5506 inhibits selectively the harmful stress on the muscle, which is due to the lack of dystrophin, but it also prevents muscle damage in a way that can reduce inflammation, protect or improve motor function in patients. This is just a little illustration. What are the biomarkers? Damaged muscle will release different proteins, and here they're listed: creatine kinase, myoglobin, fast troponin, but there are many others. And these are released into the bloodstream, and they be measured, and therefore they're called the muscle impairment, muscle damage biomarkers. And here you see the clinical development of this drug, EDG 5506, a phase 1 study on healthy adults and adults with BMD, followed by an ARC study, which was an open-label study on BMD. And now a phase 2 study on adults and adolescents with Becker's muscular dystrophy is underway, as well as a link study in phase 2, but in children with DMD. The phase 1 study has conducted on healthy adults and volunteers, and BMD show that 127 participants, generally well tolerated, without serious adverse events. Most common were drowsiness, vertigo, but transitory. Plasma PK revealed a good oral absorption of the drug, and so it is absorbed orally in the form of tablets, and muscle concentrations are well over those that are considered to be necessary for efficacy. Proteomic studies identified numerous proteins, muscle damage biomarkers, and the Becker diseases who were treated with this molecule showed a significant reduction in the high proteins at baseline level compared to a control group of healthy volunteers, as well as when compared to placebo-treated BMD patients. Now, the open-label study ARC involved 12 adult patients with BMD. They were treated with growing doses of the drug. The study lasted 1 year, and it confirmed the long-term safety of the drug, safety profile, good oral absorption, and a significant reduction in the muscle damage biomarkers, CK 40%, fast skeletal muscle troponin 75%. Therefore, certainly the target engagement was good, and a positive trend in the functional scales and motor scales was observed, as well as positive trends in the pain and fatigue questionnaire, so reduction in the damage induced by contraction of the dystrophic muscle has the potential of preserving and indeed improving muscle function, preventing disease progression. This is another ongoing study in phase 2, a Canyon study, BMD, and here you see the main enrollment criteria: age, 12 to 50 years, ambulant, not receiving steroid treatment, and the objectives are safety, biomarkers, the fat fraction in the upper limb by MR, and other functional measurements, North Star, etc. So 7 patients enrolled so far. Now we have another phase 2 study, which is underway, Duchenne patients, age 4 to 9. And here again, the genetically confirmed diagnosis, ambulant, stable dose of corticosteroids for at least 6 months. It's a US study, so exon skipping treatment, which is FDA approved, is also possible in this enrollment. A 3-month placebo-controlled study, followed by a 9-month open-label phase. The objectives are safety, secondary pharmacokinetics, the biomarkers, and functional measurements. Estimated enrollment for this study, 27. Another molecule here is ifetroban. Ifetroban is, once again, orally administered, once a day, fasting, and it provides selective blocking of the thromboxane prostanoid receptor, which can be triggered in different ways and is linked to vasoconstriction, platelet aggregation, and inflammation. The triggering of this receptor has a pro-fibrotic impact on both heart and lungs. The drug has a consolidated safety profile. It's been tested on over 1,300 subjects in different clinical studies. Ifetroban blocks the inflammatory response and the pro-fibrotic pathways in the heart, and can also block the thromboxane receptor. So what happens in skeletal muscle and also cardiac muscle, when dystrophin is lacking, there can be a loss in the integrity of the muscle fibers, which then leads to a cascade with influx of calcium intracellularly. This will lead to cell death eventually, and an important role is played here by TGF-beta, which can stimulate fibrosis and inhibit muscle repair, blocking the regeneration of the myocytes. Now, what we see here is that this drug can block the TGF-beta pathway, in this way preventing fibrosis and promoting muscle regeneration. And this leads to the possibility of making use of this potential therapy in cardiomyopathy of Duchenne's disease. And my studies have shown that a reduction, models of muscular dystrophy have shown reduced fibrosis in cardiac tissue. And the block of the transpain also reduces vasoconstriction, and therefore it can lead to improvement in cardiovascular health generally. Here we have another phase 2 study, double-blind, 1-year duration. Enrollment is open. It's being a study conducted in the United States. Children over 7 years with a genetically confirmed DMD diagnosis are admitted, and the recruitment objective is to reach 48 participants. Enrollment criteria include stable cardiac function over the last 12 months, and an ejection fraction which has to be equal or above 35%. There may be myocardial damage, which is observed under magnetic resonance. And here you have below, you can see the list of drugs that are allowed in recruitment: corticosteroids, antisense oligonucleotides, ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, angiotensin, and others. This shows the study design. 1-year duration, as I'd said, a placebo group, a second group of patients who are stratified on the basis of their ejection fraction, over 45%, under 35%. And here we also have the concluded this phase. All patients will enter the open label extension of the study, and therefore they all will receive the ifetroban. The objective is to demonstrate drug safety, primary, and then pharmacokinetics and efficacy, which will be established by looking at ejection function, pulmonary function, and also quality of life questionnaires will be used. By last June, in active treatment, there were 26 different patients. And here we have some of the preliminary findings. The safety shows that the drug is well tolerated. In only one case was the study discontinued because of the formation of bruising. And after the first study of the safety, no other important observations were made. And here an interim sort of midterm findings should be produced this month in February, and there will be a first clinical review after 6 months. Now, the last drug, CAP 1002. It's a biological drug with allogenic cells that are derived from the cardiosphere. So, donor cardiac cells, a method developed by Capricorn. It's not really cell treatment because the cells that are administered are not integrated in the receiving heart tissue, but they stimulate the production of pro-regeneration factors, which can lead to a reduction of fibrosis at the heart level and can stimulate repair. Clinical studies have shown that it has immunomodulatory impact, which is very, very powerful and can inhibit inflammation and fibrosis and promote cell regeneration. The clinical study in phase 1 is called HOPE, Halt Cardiomyopathy Progression. 13 patients with DMD are involved. A single infusion in the coronary arteries is provided with an acceptable level of safety, and functional examination seems to, the scales seem to indicate preservation of upper limb function and cardiac function. The phase 2 study was a randomized, multi-center, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical study to assess both safety and efficacy of repeated IV infusions of CAP 1002. Enrollment criteria included patients in late stages of the disease or non-ambulant, so 10 meters in over 10 seconds, or none in the case of late ambulant or non-ambulant, genetically confirmed, over 10 years of age, performance upper limb item test 2 to 5. So the Azar movement, raising the upper limb, was not preserved, but hand-to-mouth function was. Treatment with glucocorticoids for at least 12 months. The patients received IV infusions every 3 months for a total of 12 months. Primary objectives were to prove the safety and to look at the upper limb performance, motor function scale. Secondary objectives included cardiac function, lung function, biomarkers. And looking at the 20 enrolled patients after 12 months, we saw statistically significant improvement in upper limb function, both upper limbs and also cardiac function. And we see a 71% slowing down in disease progression looking at the upper limb. Looking at ejection function for cardiac function, the placebo group showed a significant reduction in ejection function, whereas the treated group was shown to have some improvement. And that is a 107% slowdown in disease progression compared to the placebo group. The phase 2 study was followed by an open label extension. The study had been discontinued for both the placebo group and the drug receiving group for a period of about 392 days, the gap phase. Then patients were enrolled in the study 2 in the extension phase. There are about 12 patients left, and these data were analyzed on the 12 enrolled patients who then resumed treatment, and it showed statistically significant improvements in the PUL scale in the 2.0 version. So improved function of the upper limbs. This, of course, is the group of patients receiving treatment. So it is possible to affirm that the drug can modify disease progression, and its long-term safety has also been confirmed because no severe adverse events were observed. A phase 3 study is currently designed with DMD patients. Enrollment is open in the United States, a randomized double-blind study, which will be placebo-controlled on a group of DMD patients over 10 years of age with a PUL 2.5. This is part of the enrollment criteria, and it will enroll 70 patients. Primary objective is changes in motor function for the upper limbs measured with the PUL 2.0 at 12 months. Secondary objective, cardiac function and quality of life questionnaires. The first patient was actually admitted to the study last July 2022. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you all for your kind attention.
E passo la parola al dottore.
And now I give the floor to Emilio. Well, just before Emilio Albamonte takes the floor, you can ask the questions at the end of this session, but you can also send the questions to the number with the WhatsApp. Now, the number should appear on screen. The number 342-328-9199. This is the phone number for your questions to be sent via WhatsApp. Good morning, everybody. The presentation, please. Professor Emilio Albamonte. Well, I'd like to go rapidly back to the role of corticosteroids when we speak about DMD treatment. We know that corticosteroids can improve strength and function in boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, acting through the glucocorticoid receptor, GR. The GR activation promotes the degradation of transcripts mediating pro-inflammatory signals and stimulates the expression of annexin A1, which blocks phospholipase A2 and leukocyte infiltration. And again, through the GR activation, we can also inhibit key pro-inflammatory mediators. However, up to some time ago, there was uncertainty regarding the optimum regimen and dosage due to the side effects of a long therapy with corticosteroids, negative effects on the liver, the pancreas, the bone, the adipose tissue, the HPA axis, and body weight. In 2022, the data of the 4DMD trial were published, and the objective of this trial was precisely comparing efficacy and adverse events of the three most frequent steroid regimens that are being used with DMD patients. So this was a double-blind randomized clinical trial, including 196 boys aged between 4 and 7 years with DMD and who had not previously been treated with corticosteroids. There was no placebo group, and the enrollment occurred between January 2013 and September 2016. 32 clinical sites involved in 5 countries, and the boys were assessed for 3 years. Out of these 229 eligible boys, 196 were really enrolled and then randomized into 3 groups. 65 patients were randomized to receive daily prednisone, 0.75 milligrams per kilo daily. 65 patients were randomized to receive daily deflazacort, 0.90 milligrams per kilo. 66 randomized to receive prednisone, 0.75 milligram intermittently. Down at the bottom of the slide, you see who are the patients who completed the primary analysis, a total of 164 patients who completed the 36-month follow-up. And we can say that there was one patient who had to leave the group due to an adverse event, so the one per group, and the other patients who did not complete the 36 months follow-up were excluded due to low adherence to the protocol. Let's see what are the main outcomes. The primary outcome, 3 endpoints, rise from the fall velocity, forced vital capacity, and the treatment satisfaction questionnaire for medication. Here you see the secondary outcomes, 10-meter walk or run velocity, North Star, ambulatory assessment, total score, distance for the 6-minute walk test, and heart function. You see the results for the primary outcome, and you see, as for the rise from the fall velocity, we saw that there are better and comparable scores with daily and intermittent, between daily and intermittent, whereas there are no clinically significant variations for the other two primary endpoints. Maybe this is clearer somehow. In the first graph, you can see the constant trend. There is a clear improvement in patients with a daily administration, and this trend is maintained over time, whereas the gray line below refers to patients with intermittent treatment, and there is a clear difference if with regard to the second endpoint, that is the forced vital capacity, where the lines overlap. Speaking about adverse events, well, we can say that most of them are considered as mild adverse events. Most of them are common in the three groups: abdominal pain, for example, GI problems, behavioral anomalies or infections in the upper airways. Others have special features such as weight gain for those who took prednisone daily, or hypertrichosis and cataract for the Flasacort taken daily. Conclusions. Well, from this trial, we can say that there is no significant variation between the two regimens of daily drugs. There is a preference for the daily use rather than the intermittent one, if we are speaking about DMD. Now let's move on to vamorolone. It is an anti-inflammatory drug, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug that binds to the same target receptors as the corticosteroids, but shows a distinct chemical structure and differences in mechanism of action. Vamorolone shows less positive genes transcriptional activity and reduces pro-inflammatory processes. As there was this first study I'll be sharing with you shortly, whereas there are other two studies that are under recruitment, one for DMD aged between 2 and 4 and then 7 to 18. And it is a phase 2 study. It's being done in Canada. And then this one is for BMD, phase 2 again in the US. Phase 2b study for which we have published data. This trial studies efficacy and safety of vamorolone versus placebo and prednisone. The duration of the study is 24 weeks. It is active in 33 referral centers in 11 countries, and it enrolls patients aged between 4 and 7 with a genetically confirmed DMD diagnosis not previously treated with steroids. And it included 4 groups: placebo, and then prednisone, 0.75 milligrams per kilo per day, vamorolone, 2 milligrams per kilo per day, again daily usage, and vamorolone 6 milligrams per kilo. these are the main outcomes, the primary outcomes. The primary outcome, time to stand from the supine velocity in the vamorolone, so again 6 milligram per day versus placebo. Secondary outcome, time to stand from supine velocity with vamorolone 2 milligrams. And then the 6-minute walk test, time to run with the 2 dosages. And then safety, growth, bone biomarkers, and ACTH. Out of 130 patients assessed for eligibility, they enrolled 121, and they randomized into 4 groups, and 114 completed the 24-week follow-up. These are the results of the primary and secondary endpoints. In the first graph, you can see how they reached the primary endpoint, especially for the speed, the velocity, to get up from the supine position, versus the placebo group, where there is stability or even worsening. The first 4 of the secondary outcomes reached their expected objectives. If we're speaking about safety, well, overall, we can say that the number of patients who had at least one adverse event was quite similar in the different groups. This is the table with the different biomarkers for bone metabolism, and for the patients who take prednisone, we observe a marked reduction of this values, which is not the case for those with vamorolone, but for all therapies we observe a reduction of basal cortisol or understimulation with ACTH. Conclusion that, what can we say? Vamorolone was shown to be effective and safe in the treatment of boys with DMD over a 24-week treatment period. Vamorolone may be a safer alternative to prednisone in DMD, where long-term corticosteroid use is the standard of care because there is a reduction in side effects. Now, rapidly, another paper. This is an LOE, an extension for a study for vamorolone with the participation of 46 boys. 46 boys were included at the beginning. That 41 completed the studies, and there was some of them took the highest dose. And in the study of the functional tests, patients have results essentially overlapping. So as patients who have taken steroids regularly. And in the last graph, you see that patients with vamorolone have a stable growth over time, whereas there is a deficit in growth in the patients who took the steroids. Then we move on to pamrevlumab, that is a monoclonal antibody that targets connective tissue growth factor, CTGF, which promotes muscle fibrosis and reduces the ability of damaged muscle cells to repair. Pamrevlumab inhibits CTGF and may prevent this cascade and slow the loss of muscle function. We know that the skeletal muscle of DMD patients shows high levels of CTGF. Here, 2 clinical studies that are underway at the moment. They're both phase 3 trial. One is for non-ambulant and the other for ambulant patients. Now, in detail, there is this Lelantus 2 that evaluates the efficacy and safety of pamrevlumab versus placebo in combination with systemic corticosteroids in ambulatory subjects with DMD. It is active in a variety of states. It started in December 2020, and the treatment period is 52 weeks. And the patients that are enrolled take pamrevlumab or placebo at 35 milligrams per kilo every 2 weeks in vein injection, and at the end of 52 weeks they may be eligible for an open label extension. And the estimated primary completion is August 2023. About 70 patients randomized at a 1-to-1 ratio, arm A or arm B, so pamrevlumab or placebo. These are the inclusion criteria. Well, age between 6 and 12, with a valid genetic test, taking steroids for at least 6 months, for a minimum of 6 months, capable of undergo MRI test of the lower limbs before the study. These are the main outcomes. Primary outcome is the change in North Star from baseline to week 52, and then secondary outcome measures, change in the four-stair climb velocity, change in 10-minute walk test, change in time to stand, time to loss ambulation. Lelantus, again, phase 3 trial. It is for non-ambulant patients, and there it evaluates the efficacy and safety of pamrevlumab versus placebo in patients that take steroids on a daily basis. So here the study began in July 2020. The treatment period is 52 weeks. And then there is the possibility of an open label extension treatment for patients who participated. Estimated primary completion February 2023. 92 patients randomized in 2 arms. Ratio again 1-to-1. There is an arm with pamrevlumab and one with placebo. Inclusion criteria: age above 12, non-ambulant, confirmed genetic diagnosis that are able to perform spirometry, heart function that is well preserved, left ventricular ejection fraction over 50%, and capable of doing a cardiac MRI. The last molecule is the ATL1102. It is an antisense oligonucleotide that binds to the RNA of CD49D, blocking its transcription. So it reduces T cells within the inflammation. We know that CD49D is expressed on T cells that are linked to the DMD. CD49D can also be considered a pathology biomarker in DMD because the tissues that have high levels of T cells are linked to a poorer disease prognosis. These are the data of this phase 2 study. They will be published soon. There it assesses efficacy, safety, and pharmacokinetics of this antisense oligonucleotides. Administration of 25 milligrams by subcutaneous injection. We have 9 boys, non-ambulatory boys, aged between 10 and 18. Participants had to be under steroid treatment for at least 3 months. So safety and tolerability of the molecules, and among secondary outcomes, lymphocyte count, functional changes in upper limb function as assessed by tools. Results. It is a safe molecule. It is well tolerated. No adverse events reported, and the lymphocyte count showed no variation during the study, but the trial conclusion showed the discontinuation of the drug and reassessment at 52 weeks. There was an increase in T lymphocytes, whereas the other functional tests showed essential stability during the trial. and now I come to my real conclusion. This is another study that is being started very soon. It's a 2B study. Again, it is the antisense oligonucleotides. It's a randomized, double-blind, multi-center placebo-controlled study with an open-label extension to study the efficacy, safety, and pharmacokinetic profile of ATL-102. 42 patients will be randomized in 3 groups. So placebo with 25 milligrams of the molecules and then 50 milligrams. After 25 weeks, with a blind in the blind, then there will be an opening, and so the administration will be done with the 2 dosages. DMD patients, genetic must be confirmed by genetics testing, non-ambulatory, then age between 10 and 18, and a pool score at least 2 or more. Among the main objectives, there is a primary objective, that is the variation in the pool score for upper limbs compared with placebo, and then secondary objectives, limb muscle strength, respiratory function, quality of life, safety, tolerability, and pharmacokinetics. The trial will start in a number of reference centers. Many states submitted their requests, applied to participate, and recently the regulatory bodies approved it for Turkey. So for 2023, in 2023, we'll have the first patient enrolled in Turkey for the trial. Thank you.
Grazie, dottoressa Catteruccia.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Dr. Catteruccia and Dr. Albomonte for these very comprehensive presentations. So now we'll start with our question and answer session. We in Parent Project really have a question to Dr. Becker, because this molecule is we're very interested in. Parent Project and Teleton is believed in this, in the advantage of this approach, and we followed the first clinical studies in Professor Lorenzo Puli's laboratory. We participated in the enrollment through our patient registry and provided also psychological support, thanks to our psychologists, throughout the trial, thanks to the Duchenne Listening Center. And we're also pleased that this is the only active Italian pharmaceutical company that is active in this area on Duchenne and Becker. So we've observed and followed the progress in this molecule very carefully, with great hope. And there has been, we've heard also globally, a lot of interest. So we've heard the good outcomes. Our question is, what can we hope for? What can we look forward in the future?
Non posso che sottolineare le parole che...
Well, all I can do is emphasize what you've said very rightly. This is an example, a very positive example of collaboration between the companies and the associations, with a story that has led to the outcomes that we have seen, and we hope that they will be the foundations, the basis for what will become the availability of this drug for all Duchenne patients. From the very beginning, we worked with the Parent Project to define the trials more carefully, to provide support to the families. We're well aware of the fact that a clinical trial requires a huge effort on the part of families. And so we did what we could in that sense to try to make this journey a little less difficult and stressful.
Grazie mille, Paolo. Grazie infinito.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you on behalf of the Duchenne and Becker communities. So now we'll have questions and answers. Fernanda De Angelis of the Scientific Office and Sarah Williams of the Renoir Project, a PhD student who's helping us, are both here. So you can just raise your arm and ask your questions. Don't be shy. There's a mic that is available, and I know that Linda's online. It's late for you, I understand. Thank you for being with us. Linda of Cindy Capricorn.
Ingrid, sorry. Can you...
Hello, thank
Grazie per essere qui con noi collegati.
Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for having connected from so far away.
Domande a mani alzate. Ne vedo una alla...
No one has raised their hand, led. Sarah, do you have someone? I can start by reading some of the questions. And of course, you can also ask your questions online. Now, this is a question from Alessandro, and he wants to know when we will see this drug available in Italy and for smaller children.
Da remoto.
Who was the question for?
La ripeto di nuovo.
Let me repeat the question. A father is asking us when we will see the study with your approach in Italy. When will it be available also for smaller children? So when do you think you'll be able to open a study, launch a study in our country? And when will this or other studies start involving younger children?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I wish I could be there in person. I truly am grateful for the invitation and look forward to being there in person next year. Right now, we are laser focusing on finishing our HOPE-3 trial in the later stage, that is older than 10-year-old people with Duchenne muscular dystrophy in the United States, the HOPE-3 clinical trial. We did announce last week that we are now going to partner with Nippon Shinyaku to bring CAP-1002 to Japan. That's our first outside of the United States effort, and that will be commencing along with the HOPE-3 trial fairly soon. We hope to be in Europe as soon as possible after that. Certainly our new manufacturing facility that we've built in our San Diego offices in California will meet EMA requirements for manufacturing cells, and that was a first and very important step to going outside of the United States. In terms of the younger children, we obviously will be very focused on indication expansion. As I said, we have focused on the later stage, primarily non-ambulant patient population based on our very positive data from HOPE-1 and HOPE-2 and the HOPE-2 open label extension, and are following up on that with HOPE-3. But we firmly believe that time is muscle, and we will ultimately try and get it to the younger patients as soon as we possibly can, with regulatory support. Thank you.
Grazie mille. Sara.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning. I'm from the CNR Rome. I was curious about how the molecule EBG-5506 works. I don't know who to address this question to, but it had been designed to protect the muscle from damage, contraction-induced damage. It seems to inhibit myosin. Vaz, can you tell us a little bit more about the mechanism of action of the drug? Thank you.
Yes. Hi, Joanne Donovan.
Joanne?
Yes.
Yes.
Is it? That's better. Okay. And I'm hearing myself. So the mechanism is to target myosin in fast muscle cells. And what it does is it modulates, it affects that a tiny bit so that what happens is it protects the muscle without affecting function. And so we've seen that both in animal models, we've seen that in healthy volunteers, that we don't see any function, any negative function on muscle. And more importantly, in patients with Becker muscular dystrophy, we see a very significant drop in the biomarkers of muscle damage, so preventing muscle damage. And we are now at 6 months starting to see an improvement in their function as well, as compared to what you would have expected, which would have been a decline in function. So that's how we think that the molecule is working. It's basically going to the contraction-induced damage, which is the basis of what happens in Duchenne and Becker.
Nel frattempo, grazie Già.
Thank you, thank you. In the meantime, I have another question that has just arrived online from someone on Giovannostat. No, so are there any prospects? That question needs to be repeated.
Ovviamente
Well, let's now we're working on preparing the file to have it approved as a single drug treatment. Once that is done, then future studies will try to understand or to look at any possible combinations of drugs. But all this needs to be thought about and worked on.
Grazie mille. Ci sono altre mani?
Are there any other questions? One over here. Sarah, can you get that question for us?
Okay, over here. Libero Vitello dell'Università di Padova.
University of Padua. I'll give my question first in Italian, then in English. I'd like to understand, on Capricorn, if you could give us any indications on what cell types are used to encapsulate the Capricorn.
You're using to be encapsulated. What's the origin? What's the origin of the cells?
Yeah, thank you for your question. CAP-1002 is an allogeneic, which means off-the-shelf cell therapy product. It is made from explanted hearts that are of transplant quality, but cannot be used for technical reasons. In the United States, this happens approximately 40% of the time. So we have no shortage of hearts that will be available to make CAP-1002. When we get a heart, we isolate out the cell of interest. It's a cell that is actually natural or endogenous to the heart, but in very small numbers. And we believe that it is protective of the heart because, as you know, inflammation and also damage to the heart is rare and can be catastrophic if not managed well. Once we isolate out the cells of interest, we put them through proprietary methods to grow them up in large numbers, where we then freeze them and we deliver them in doses of 150 million cells 4 times a year, every 3 months. And we have found that this delivery method using intravenous delivery, very simple 45-minute infusion process, has been very effective and has caused the generation of very positive clinical data, which I think you saw very nicely presented today. Thank you.
Facciamo un'altra domanda.
Another question? I have a question on EDG 5506. It's been said that the enrollment is open in the United States. What about Italy? Can enrollment begin in Italy? Do we need to wait for the American trial to be concluded first? That's my question. Thank you.
Joanne?
Yes, okay. Yeah, we are actively looking at sites in Italy for the Becker study and for the next Duchenne study as well.
Abbiamo un'altra qui.
Another question coming up.
Morolone, I think it's very important to have alternatives in the corticosteroids. But I was wondering, I understood it was a safer option than prednisone on the long term, but I was wondering about the efficiency. I understood it was efficient, but compared to the prednisone or maybe the deflazacort, how is the efficiency when you compare it to that? Is it the same? Is it less? Is it more?
Thank you for your question. Sorry that I can't speak Italian, so I have to do it in English, and I hope it will be translated. If not, Michela can probably answer in Italian later on. One of the most important things to demonstrate is the efficacy, and what we have shown now is that's equally effective as prednisone in the direct comparison. And at a later stage, we have compared in a pre-specified way how it compares with deflazacort. And for that, data from the 4DMD study were used. And via advanced statistical methods, patients were selected from that population. And yeah, so in short, yes, it is equally effective and safer. And what you have not seen yet, but the manuscript is under preparation for, is the extension of the second phase of the pivotal trial, which runs until 48 weeks. And there, both placebo and prednisone patients are switched onto one of the two vamorolone doses. And there we see very nice effects that where for the patients that were originally on vamorolone for the 6 milligram dose, the effect is maintained. And what you see then, and the bone marker data were very nicely presented today. You see a catch-up of the bone markers in the prednisone, in the patients that were previously treated with prednisone. And I think more important, you also see catch-up growth in height in those patients. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you, DJ. Ho una domanda per Michela Guglieri.
I have a question for Michela Guglieri. It came from one of our families. And this, we've seen a very large study. Many patients have been followed for many, many years. So the question is, where will these data be going? Can these data be used to enrich the registers and for the natural history of patients, for instance? How will these data be used? Well, it is indeed a very large study. And we'd like to thank all of the families who took part in this, because compared to other clinical studies, it was very interesting. There was use of a drug that was commercially available, and all children had access to it. So it was there was a big commitment of all families to really contribute to understand better how the steroids actually work. The data have been published. The study was financed by the US NIH, and therefore there is an obligation on the part of Rochester University and another university of the sponsors to make all of the data publicly available 1 year or 18 months after publication. So these data will become public by the summer of this year, and they will be accessible to anyone. In the meantime, we have also collaborated in the study to really try to obtain the best of these data, the most useful. And these data have been made available to pharmaceutical companies to compare, but not only to compare the outcomes or the results of other treatments such as gene therapy or vamorolone, but also to help to design clinical studies involving younger patients from 4 to 8 years of age to understand better how this young subgroup responds to steroids and how this treatment could be compared to treatment with other drugs. And so we're working with Sarepta and others. We're trying to work to compare them. And we're working with academics to make a better use of these data, to work with in collaboration with others. So anyone who is interested or has specific questions can address it.
Una domanda, se non...
Thank you, Michela. If there aren't any other questions, Fernanda, we have lots of questions we're receiving on the telephone line, but we're also happy to take questions here from the hall. I have a question for Anti-Sense and for Ingrid from Cumberland. Are you envisaging bringing these studies to Europe and to Italy in particular?
Grazie, Annabelle.
Thank you, Annabelle.
So that's myself. This first study with the phase 2A, we plan to get through that first before we move into the larger phase 3 study, which we definitely would plan to, will expect to bring to Italy. And by doing this first smaller study first, it will hopefully be able to let us refine that phase 3 study so we can go into a single dose. And it will be a larger study, of course, so I would expect we would be coming into a number of European countries, hopefully including Italy as well.
Thank you so much, Annabelle.
Ingrid. Thank you for your question. We have our phase 2 study, and that's ongoing right now in the US and 10 sites. And so once we complete that, we depending on the results, we are interested in embarking on a phase 3 study, which will be open in multiple countries. So thank you.
Grazie mille. Fernanda?
I have a question on cortisone administration. If I've understood correctly, there is scientific evidence that shows that it's better to administer it on a daily basis. So why is it still being prescribed on alternate days? I have a 7-year-old child, and he is receiving cortisone every other day. Why is that so?
Lo studio 4DMD ha comparato
A study compared a prednisone administered daily with prednisone administered 10 days on, 10 days off. And this, the findings of the study have been published very recently, so it's new evidence. And it's true that the study has shown that in terms of efficiency, daily administration of steroids has better results than the intermittent 10 days on, 10 days off. From the point of view of side effects, we have to understand that there are pros and cons, and the side effects have shown that from the point of view of weight gain, prednisone administered daily or alternate days within 3 years leads to marked weight gain more than another drug administered every day. And so we haven't seen very big difference with prednisone intermittently or daily in terms of weight. In terms of height, we've seen that deflazacort is associated with a stronger impact on height. The children are generally shorter than those receiving prednisone. And prednisone, 10 days on, 10 days off, allows for more growth. So there's always a trade-off. There are emerging data also on bone tissue that show that the intermittent administration seems to have less an impact on bone than daily administration. So we also have to take that into account. When cortisones are given, then you have to look not only at clinical data but also the individual patient. So I'm not going to call into question any clinical judgment. It will depend on the given child. But these are data, and of course they have to be discussed with the clinicians. Thank you, Michela. We have 3 or 4 minutes more and so many questions. Let me try to summarize a few questions. We're being asked when by the families, but when the drugs Santera, for instance, will be available to families. This is for Italfarmaco. Well, Italfarmaco is, as I said before, working very hard to get all of the documentation ready, submit it to the regulatory authorities. We're in the final phases I can't give you any specific dates. I can tell you that we are approaching the finish line, so you will receive information on the specific date on both in the United States and in Europe. Thank you, Paolo.
I will answer the question for vamorolone. We are in a fortunate situation. We have submitted files both in the US and in Europe. And since the information is in the public domain, I can tell you that we anticipate marketing authorization on both continents early Q4 of this year. Now, that will not mean that it immediately becomes available to patients in all countries, because in many countries, then after that, you'll have to engage in pricing and reimbursement discussions with the local authorities, because this is not harmonized in Europe. Yeah, and that can take anywhere from between 9 months, fastest. And some countries up to 3 years, 4 years. You may remember difficult discussions with other products. And so for Italy, I think specifically we count on a process that will take 1 year. And so imagine a file to be submitted early 24, so early 25. Products should be available for Italian patients as well.
Grazie, grazie mille.
Thank you. Last question. On Italfarmaco, I'd like to know whether with Juvinostat administration, whether cardiac function was monitored, and if so, what were the results? Well, we did cardiac echography prior and to the study and at study end, and also from our safety assessment, and we saw that the parameters generally were stable. Now, can this be translated into a sign of efficiency? We can't say so yet. But what we've seen echographically is stability in terms of cardiac function. Thank you, Paolo. Last piece of information before we break for lunch. Starting from 1 o'clock, you can collect your lunch boxes. And please take the time also to look at the posters that are outside on display on the floors -2, -1. And this evening at 7:30 in this hall here, we will be giving awards for the best educational poster. Those who have presented posters have also tried to present a legible, understandable version of the poster, and we have a little jury, and the jury has looked at all of the work done. And so at 9:30 we will give an award to this popularization of the poster. So thank you for that. I'd like to thank all of our speakers, the members of the panel, and all the representatives of the different companies here, as well as all those who are online. Many have been with us at very uncomfortable hours. Thank you very much for that. And we're now in this session. Thank you.
Lo dico? Proprio 2? L'ultima cosa, scusate, ricominciamo alle 14 precise.
We will be starting back here at 2 p.m. sharp, 2 o'clock sharp.